Morning. Today is February 21st, 2013, and yesterday in the Kransky trial there was some very interesting testimony. This was the very first day that the defendants actually started to put on their case, and it started off with sort of what we expected the defendants to do. The first testimony they had was from various treating doctors who treated Mr. Kransky, the plaintiff in the case, for his ailments. And unfortunately for Mr. Kransky, he had a lot of ailments before his hip was put in and while he was dealing with the hip at the time. Mr. Kransky had cancer, he had kidney problems, he had had lots of heart problems. He had had a stroke, problems with his vascular system. And the implication that I think the defendants are trying to make in the case is that somehow all of these health problems contributed to the problems he was having with his hip, or that the problems with the hip were diminished because of these other problems. And so they spent a lot of time presenting the testimony of doctors, usually by video. These are doctors in Montana, explaining all of the problems that Mr. Kransky had. The other thing that they've been trying to do in the case is present this theory of, I call it the infection theory. And the idea is that they're trying to convey is that Mr. Kransky, when his hip was put in originally, he contracted an infection at the very beginning, and that infection sort of festered in his hip for years. And when his hip was revised in 2010, when the doctor went in, 2011, when the doctor went in, he observed that Mr. Kransky had an infection. For this reason, Mr. Kransky would have had to have revision surgery with any hip, and that the problems he had with the hip weren't because of its design, it was because of an infection. So what they did was they presented the testimony from the doctor who did the revision surgery. And it's a little confusing, I think, for the jurors, because when the doctor went in to Mr. Kransky's hip, he originally believed he was looking at an infection. And the reason for that is metallosis and an infection are very similar in appearance. Metallosis is essentially inflammation of the tissue that causes pus and things to develop. And when you get an infection, it's the same thing. You have inflammation of the tissue destruction, and you have pus and things develop in the hip. And that's your body's reaction to infection, as it is to metallosis or anything else that's invading your hip. So the doctor has lots of testimony about how he went in, he saw something that looked like an infection, and he treated it like an infection. And it's a little confusing because when doctors go in, they don't know if it's an infection initially, but they treat it like it is just in case. And then what they'll do is they'll take cultures, and cultures are basically the way to determine if someone does have an infection, because when you take fluid or tissue from the hip joint and you culture it, you'll be able to tell if there's actually bacteria in there. And bacteria is what causes an infection. So for Mr. Kransky, the surgeon went in, thought he was looking at an infection, took cultures. Cultures don't come back. The results don't come back for maybe a week or two. And so the cultures all came back negative, showing there was no bacteria in the hip joint. And so the plaintiff's theory is that there was no infection, there was never a lingering, festering infection there, that this was metallosis. Mr. Kransky's body was reacting to the assault from the metal ions, and it looked like an infection, but it wasn't. And so what we heard today was a lot of testimony from the surgeon talking about infection and how he was treating him for infection. And it appears that it's designed solely to confuse the jury and to confuse the issues in the case, and really to sort of put forward this infection theory of the case, which I don't think is going to fly at the end of the day, but we'll see. So that's how we ended up today. If you have any questions or comments about defective hips, or your defective hips. At Kershaw Cutter, we're representing hundreds of patients who have all kinds of hip issues. Feel free to give us a call. You can reach us at 916-448-9800. You can also reach me on Skype, either by instant messaging or video conferencing. My Skype username is Stuart Talley, StuartTalley. Or feel free to visit our website. Our website is cobaltchromiumtoxicity.com, and that's www, the word cobalt, and a dash, chromium and a dash, and toxicity.com.